A little over 1 week ago, the Lunduke Journal published a delightful little article entitled, "Is the GNOME Foundation Going to Go Bankrupt in 1 year? It Looks That Way." And this was based on the information we had up until that point. All of the financial and annual reports from the GNOME Foundation, up to date, compiled with whatever few and sparse statements the GNOME Foundation had made. And I stand by that article. It was spot on in my financial analysis. There was a problem though, and I'm going to read a quote from the article in order to highlight this problem. Quote, "The GNOME Foundation has been unusually silent about their operations, not publishing any public reports for closing in on 2 years now. And their strategy to save themselves from bankruptcy appears to center around sustainability, diversity, and inclusion." And that's really, end quote. That's all the information we had. It was very difficult to try and figure out what was going on with the GNOME Foundation with such a small amount of data. It had been almost 2 years since we'd gotten any real good financial data out of the GNOME Foundation, either in the form of IRS Form 990 filings or annual reports or whatever. Well, that article kind of lit a bit of a fire underneath the tushies of the GNOME Foundation, apparently, because a whole lot of people began yelling about it. People, YouTubers and podcasters and people on social media, little armchair open source quarterbacks started yelling about how, Lunduke can't possibly be right about this. Lunduke's evil. Lunduke is wrong about everything he's saying here. Well, all of them yelling about that just kind of reinforced the point that the GNOME Foundation had been secretive about all their finances and their plans, right? It just reinforced the fact that they were kind of late in telling people what they were doing and what their finances were, because all we could do was speculate about the last 2 years of finances. And that fire underneath said tushy resulted in the GNOME Foundation apparently quickly throwing a slapdash report together. This is a real thing. And 8 days after my article, they released their GNOME Foundation annual report. Ta-da! Holy heavens. And it is really sparse. It is really short. You can find it over at foundation.gnome.org. And you can read the whole thing there. I'm going to read a little bit of it to you now because honestly, it's a little bit... It's underwhelming. I want to point out, though, that there is some good news in amongst this report. There is some good positive GNOME Foundation news, and there's a lot of negative GNOME Foundation news, and then there's a whole lot of just filler. It is a very peculiar annual report that I would say took less than 8 hours to put together. If you tasked me with putting together a GNOME Foundation report and you said, Lunduke, you have 3 hours to do it, I would come up with something that had more detail than this. It's real light on details, but I'm gonna read some of it to you anyway. I would like to point out that the PDF file in total has 14 pages. Many of the pages are just nothing. They're just filler pages, title pages, ending pages, copyright pages, table of contents pages. There's really not a lot here. There's maybe about 8 pages of data in here, the majority of which was copy and pasted from previous years' annual reports with slight tweaks to it. Really not much at all. But what there is, let's go ahead and take a look at. First, there's a letter from the board of directors, from the board president, Robert McQueen. Now, I'm not going to read that whole letter to you, but if you read it, you will note that there really isn't a whole lot there. It's very simple. It's like, I am thrilled to share with you our achievements and thank you to all of you, and I am delighted to celebrate our resounding success, right? It doesn't talk about their financial woes. It doesn't talk about some of the other problems they've been having. It just kind of is fluff filler. And that's not to say it's a poorly written little letter from the editor. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 paragraphs of fluff. The largest paragraph being how they hired a new executive director, Holly Million, which we've talked about in the past. However, there is no quote here from their executive director. There is no statement from the executive director. There is no letter from there's nothing. There's literally no involvement from their executive director in this annual report that I can find at all, which is fascinating. You would think you'd be able to come up with a quick, here's a forward-looking statement from the executive director, or I'm so excited to be part of the blah, blah, blah. Nope, nothing, nothing at all. And then there's quite a few pages of filler. What is the GNOME project? It's just a copy and paste from years before. One of the biggest, most highly produced pages on here probably took about an hour to put together, and that is a timeline of a couple of releases and events. Nothing too big, nothing too exciting here, nothing that talks about their woes, no details really. It just shows that there was a timeline. Oh, okay, that's fine. And yes, GNOME did have some releases that technically went out, and they had some of their standard usual events, and people took a few pictures there, and they have an advisory board. This again is copy and paste, pretty much verbatim from past years. Here's an advisory board. Here's text that we've all seen before of companies that talk to the GNOME Foundation, blah, 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 blah. All right, now let's move on to their finances, because most of that was all just filler. There are 3 pages relating to their finances. The first is a blog post about it, which is I'm going to read to you in full now, and then 2 pages which are pretty darn sparse, but we're going to go through them anyway. Quote, "The following report shows the GNOME Foundation's overall financial performance and ending position for the most recent completed fiscal year. Please note that these are not the final accountant-reviewed financial numbers for the year. Our board of directors will review and approve numbers for the year ended, and the final report will be posted on our website in the next several months." Okay, so these are not final numbers, but they might be rough numbers. They could be different than this a little or different from this a lot. We don't know, but here's the numbers they have so far. Okay, that's actually pretty normal for these sorts of annual reports. Usually they get updated later, and the numbers usually differ quite a bit from the IRS filings. That's not unusual. All right, for most of the past fiscal year, the GNOME Foundation was operating without an executive director, without oversight from an executive director, and without a substantial investment in crucial funding to support our core operating expenses, program offerings, and staff costs. The GNOME Foundation had a deficit year. Okay, so they still have a deficit year, just like I reported. Ta-da! However, I would like to point out a bit of a logical fallacy here. Having or not having an executive director should not influence whether or not the GNOME Foundation is operating at a loss. It does not take an executive director to stop the foundation from spending more than they're taking in. Having a board and a board president should be enough to accomplish that. Having been intimately involved with open source projects and foundations on boards of directors in the past, that is a nonsense sentence. That sentence is just made up gobbledygook. It is an excuse that is not even an excuse. It's pretendy. That is not a real thing. Also, the fact that they did not have an executive director for the majority of that time means they had less expenses, and it should have been easier to balance the budget, not harder. Just pointing it out that that doesn't make any sense at all. All right, final paragraph here. Fortunately, we have had a comfortable cash reserve fund on hand. That's true. And this sustained our organization during this transition period. In the new fiscal year, the board has approved a budget that, if met, will result in a break-even financial position at the end of the year. We are also making investments in our fundraising programs, corporate sponsorship, outreach, and other revenue streams, and expect to perform much better in the year ahead, 2023 to 2024. Any questions about the finances may be directed to our new executive director, Holly Million, there's her email address. All right, a couple of things there. First, their executive director does not respond to email from press. Has not for the last half year. Nobody at the GNOME Foundation responds to email from press over the last half year. It should also be noted that the Lunduke Journal has historically been an incredibly positive towards GNOME press outlet. I have written more glowing reviews and discussions of GNOME than I care to count. I've written articles and done shows talking about the gloriousness of different releases of GNOME over the years. I have written articles praising past annual reports and past board decisions by the GNOME Foundation. Overwhelmingly, the Lunduke Journal has been incredibly supportive and positive towards the GNOME Foundation. So you can't really claim that they won't talk to me because I'm anti-GNOME. If you combine together all the articles and the coverage, I'm more positive than I am negative, right? I'm just honest. When I see problems, I call them out. When I see good things, I call them out. And in this particular little show we're doing here today, there's going to be a bit of both because the truth and reality is what's important here. Another thing to point out is that they have a budget, they're saying. They are not announcing what that budget is. That's critical. They're being very closed about what that budget is and what those plans are. However, what they are saying is that if, big if, they meet that budget, they will break even. Okay, we don't know what that means. We don't know if that budget is reliant on them firing people or reducing staff. We don't know if that budget is entirely dependent on getting more money. We seriously have no idea. So let's look at the money they've got coming in and let's look at some good news. Because good news is good news. I would like the GNOME Foundation and the GNOME project to succeed. I truly, really would. I like it when these projects succeed. It makes me happy. So when I look at these numbers and I see that the amount of income that they received, right, went up significantly between 2022 and 2023, that makes me happy. Now, again, their years are a little different here. It's not the exact calendar year. It ends in the summer, but so this is roughly a year ago that this ended. But in 2022, that fiscal year was $363,000 of income. The next year was $556,000. Ho ho! Now here's where the good news comes in, because when I put together my article where I make that big statement of, hey, could the GNOME Foundation be going bankrupt in a year? That was assuming that their fundraising did not go up. It did. This is a huge win. This is a big win for GNOME, because if that's happening and they reduce their overall spending a bit, they could be at break-even point if they can keep that funding level up and keep their spending a little bit lower than they have been, which means no bankruptcy. That's what that means. Unfortunately. So there's the good news and then there's bad news. Unfortunately, let me scroll down here to the expenses page. Their expenses went up. When you are spending more than you're making, don't start spending more. What are you doing? What are you absolutely doing? This is insane. Oh my heavens. Their expenses went from $649,000 to $76,000. What on earth were you guys thinking? That means that they're still operating at a deficit of $125,000, something like that. Now, the good news here is, because their income went up quite a bit in that particular time frame, big if, there's lots of ifs floating around, if that income level stays high up there, which historically it has not, so there's no reason to think it will, but let's hope. Let's assume it will. Let's give them the benefit of the doubt. Let's hope for the best, right? From an analysis perspective. And they keep their expenses currently the same. Well, now instead of being bankrupt in a year, they're bankrupt in like 3. Better, right? I mean, this is an improvement. This is an improvement. This means that they now have gone from the situation is dire and they need to fix it immediately to the situation is pretty darn bad and they better fix it pretty soon. But they have the chance now to make mistakes and still survive, right? Because instead of just 1 year or a little less of runway left, they now have a couple years. right? They could make it maybe 3 years. Sure, I'm just some quick paper napkin math, but that means that they've got some time to make some mistakes. Now, they've been incredibly quiet. Now, that's the entirety of the report, by the way. There's really, that's it. Find us online. Again, there's nothing. This is the most slapdash, quickly put together report. Seriously, they obviously threw this together in like a day. They obviously had a fire lit under their tushy and were forced to put a report together, and they put it out in a day. But I'm just going to go ahead and say this. Kudos to them for taking the initiative and doing that, because they got criticized for something, and rightly so. That criticism was correct, and they rectified it. Right? We notice this. When a corporation, a foundation, an organization gets a valid criticism leveled against them, which the GNOME Foundation did, and they quickly fix it, that is worthy of a high five, right? High five to the GNOME Foundation for fixing it. Now, that doesn't mean that everything you're doing is great here, GNOME Foundation. You're screwing up in quite a few ways. And again, this comes from someone who mostly posts positive stuff about you, mostly writes positive, glowing articles about you. So listen up when I'm telling you this. And again, this is from someone who has a lot of experience as being executives of companies and sitting on boards of directors for open source foundations and projects. So listen up. 1, don't spend more than you make. Stop it, right? That's not something that you need to, think about in the future and have a plan for your executive director to implement in a year. No. Now, today, if you're spending more than you're bringing in, stop it. Just stop it. Knock it off. Call it a day. Fire someone if you have to. I know that's harsh. It's business. Do it. Get your books in order. If your numbers from the previous year are still holding true for your income, getting yourself to a net even point should be an instant thing. Instant. You should be sitting here on a Wednesday or a Thursday and go, we should do that. And by the end of the next day, by the end of Friday, by the end of that week, you should be at least at the break-even point. No problem. Okay. 2, you are the GNOME desktop environment, and the suite of software that goes along with it is a critical part of the enterprise offerings for Red Hat, for SUSE, for Canonical. Billions of dollars are flooding into the enterprise Linux market, of which the GNOME Foundation has a critical role. Getting those companies and the Linux Foundation and many others to donate significant amounts of money to fund the GNOME Foundation and GNOME Project's operations well above what it currently brings in should be a no-brainer, easy task. Number 1, it should not be requiring an executive director to do that. But if you have an executive director that has been there for half a year and hasn't accomplished that executive director is terrible at their job. It's a slam dunk, home run, hole in one, all done at once while blindfolded because it's just so gosh darn easy for you. It's super duper easy. This is, if you need help with this, feel free to reach out to me. You know how to get a hold of me. You've got my email address. I will write an elevator pitch for you to go to these companies and have that done within 30 days. Guarantee you, 100% guarantee you, we could easily get the GNOME Foundation's income up over $1 million for the calendar year or the fiscal year within 30 days if you actually wanted to. If you knew what you were doing, it would be at that point already. The fact that it's not tells me that you have no idea how to do this work. I'm sorry that's blunt, but it is the truth. And again, that comes from someone who has done this work. I'm not speaking as an armchair quarterback who's never done it before, but is pretty sure I can make a touchdown. No, this is what I have done. I have done this. It's not hard. You should be able to do this without experience doing this. That's how easy it is. And it's easy because of how critical your project is to these companies, right? It's not like you're going to them asking them to be charitable. You can go to them and make a very simple case that it is in their best business interests to work with you to make sure you have quality funding going forward. If it's not done, you guys are screwing up. You guys are leaving money on the table, and you are screwing up monumentally to an extreme degree. I don't know what number I'm at, but let's say item Q. Start responding to your press. I've reached out to your executive director, to your board of directors and whatnot many times. Now, I've gotten no response, none whatsoever. And you could say, oh, but you're a combative person, Lunduke. No. Again, I've written so many positive, glowing things about the GNOME Foundation. By not responding to me, you are ensuring that you have no say over the content that I write, right? Because if you responded to me, even if the GNOME Foundation fundamentally disagreed with the Lunduke Journal's analysis, I could then include your point of view in my pieces, right? I could write my analysis and say, but I reached out to the GNOME Foundation. They fundamentally disagreed. Here is in full the quote and comment they gave to me, which provides their point of view on the situation, right? And then what we have is more information for people, and you are better represented. So I have to ask, what in the heck are you guys doing in the GNOME Foundation? Have you never worked with press before? Of course, this is insanity. Has your executive director never worked with press before? Come on now. I'm not hostile press, but I am going to be a fair press. I am going to call you out when you do something wrong, and I'm going to high-five you when you do something right. Right? Because not only am I a journalist, but I'm also going to be opining and providing my opinions and analysis on all of these topics, right? So respond. Come on, guys. And finally, item, XVII. Start being a little more open. You're a free software, open source foundation. You need to be a little more open. The amount of effort it took to get you guys to release the current data is asinine. I applaud you for doing it. I applaud you for getting called out for screwing up and not providing these details and quickly hustling to release something. It could have been better, but you know what? I'm proud of you for releasing it. Now, going forward, my recommendation is release the minutes of all of your board meetings. Because what we have so far is that we know you have board meetings and a tweet from one of your board members talking about diversity and inclusion and sustainability. None of which addresses the core things that GNOME project people are concerned with. None of that which addresses the core things that GNOME users are concerned with. And so we have no idea. We have no idea in the press what it is you're doing. And so we're going to take what little information we have, and that is a shamrock emoji, hashtag technology. Literally, that's the only that's one of the few bits of information we have about your board meetings is hashtag technology, which is the most meaningless thing I've ever heard in my life. And we're going to report on that. Don't make that the only story. Release the minutes publicly so that they can be reported on. Right? And then there's no hypotheticals. There's no, what does this even mean sort of articles. We can explicitly say this is what the GNOME Foundation is doing. Whether we agree with it or disagree with it, this is what they're doing. And we can report on that. And there's no guesswork involved. There's no daydreaming involved. There's no looking at past numbers and trying to extrapolate out and do crazy math involved. No. We just get to look at what you're publishing. Unfortunately, you're not doing that. You're not doing the very basics of what a board of an open source foundation needs to be doing. Publishing your financials regularly and openly, publishing your board member meeting minutes regularly and openly, communicating with the press, having your executive director talk with the public. I haven't seen her do a single interview, article, nothing. She's total radio silence, right? No availability whatsoever for anybody, right? So you're probably at this point one of the most closed off, isolated, closed community projects and foundations that exist in the open source world right now. It's not great. It's not a good look. Fix that. Super easy to do, to fix on a dime. You can fix that tomorrow. Start reaching out to press. Respond to PR requests. It can be very simple. You have an executive director working full time, right? So being as nothing else seems to be getting done, there should be plenty of time to respond to press. You say she'll respond to press. Now actually do it. You haven't yet. And you can turn this all around in no time. Literally, if you turn this around now, the next article, the next show I produce about GNOME will be, holy heavens, what happened to the GNOME Foundation? They hit a rocky patch, but boy, did they turn it around. Holy heavens, high five. It's going to be a positive thing, right? Do you see how this works? This is me taking off my journalism hat and putting on my I'm advocating for you hat right now. Fix yourselves. And if you want any more advice, just reach out to me, for heaven's sakes. Goodness gracious, people. All right, that about does it for this installment of Lunduke Lectures and Open Source Foundation for doing something stupid. Tune in next week for the next one. Who knows who we'll be talking about then? And with that, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, nerds and nerdettes across the inner tubes, I do declare, end broadcast.